This video is part of the Missouri Scholars Academy 2021 Comics, Culture, and the World video series. An interview with Dave DeMarco, Legends, Comics, and Coffee, June 3rd, 2021. I'm sitting here with Dave DeMarco, who is the owner and runs Legends, Comics, and Coffee in Omaha, Nebraska, because our viewers mostly are going to be from Missouri.
Hello.
So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your role here at Legends, Comics, and Coffee, and how long you've been working here.
So my role primarily is, I guess, sort of like the face, like doing this sort of thing. I know it's an unfortunate case, but hey, we work with what we got. But yeah, I handle like going to people's houses to appraise collections. I deal with a lot of the public, check people out, etc. My business partner Wendy handles a lot of the background stuff, orders, the boring stuff, right? But it's the most crucial stuff. So my greatest skill was recognizing that I have a wonderful business partner and to not get in her way. I came on board. Legend was created in 2007, 7707, and it was with Wendy and her husband Jason. And then I came on board in 2010 because they were wanting to move the store to the building that we're in now, which is this old grocery store. And the person who was renovating the building wanted to make sure there was a coffee shop. And so Jason and Wendy were like, well, we could do a comic book store coffee shop. That'd be cool, but we don't, coffee shops are expensive. And they had just opened. I was like, well, I have always wanted to be a comic book store owner. Could I come on board as a business partner? And they talked it over and they said yes. And so in 2010, I bought 50% of Legend from them. And then that money went towards the move and the acquisition of equipment and remodeling and all that kind of stuff. And now we have been in this location since 2011, and it's been pretty great. So 11 years here and then 4 total in the other place. Not too bad. So,
yeah. When and why did you begin reading and collecting comics?
There was one summer when I was about 4 or 5, and I was going to go to Salina, Kansas with my mother, and she had a cousin there, and that cousin was married to a guy named Rick, and Rick owned a drugstore. And I was basically going to spend the summer there with my mom and her cousin and Rick, and just doing what, they lived in like a little house with a yard and all that kind of stuff. And Rick had the foresight to take a comic or 2 every week off of his spinner rack and put them in a big cardboard box. And when I arrived, he pushed that box at me and was like, here you go, kiddo, you got these comics. And I just, like, when the adults were talking, I didn't really have anything to do. I would just be reading comics under a tree or on like the swing set or whatever. And it just kind of became this, like, I didn't recognize it at the time, but it became one of those kind of like seminal childhood memories of just reading comics. They had a stream that ran outside their backyard. So I'd be down there like playing on the water and catching crawdads. And then I'd go and sit and read comics under the tree and drink lemonade or strawberry Shasta or whatever I was drinking. And yeah, and these are great. Like, it was like early 80s. So it was like really awesome time for Spider-Man and Daredevil and X-Men. And it was a lot of Marvel stuff, because I know I'm a Marvel person. Not that there's anything wrong with DC. I love Batman, I love Superman, but it just became what I liked. So yeah, that was huge. And then when I came back from that summer, I was just like, comic books. Like, I want comic books, I want cartoons, I want that stuff. And so that was neat. And then later on, there was a moment in my life when I gave comics up. Like, they were just putting all these variants and the writing and everything was kind of shoddy and just nothing was good, it felt like. And so I just sort of stopped reading them and I gave up. And I was just doing my own other thing. I still like nerd stuff, but I'm just like watching anime or something like that. But then I was at a party. I was in college, and I saw a guy at that party named Matt, and I didn't know him, and I didn't know anyone at the party. I was just like there and kind of like standing around doing whatever. And this guy Matt like raised his arm up, and he had a Hellboy tattoo. And I was like, I like Hellboy. That's a good comic. I will go and talk to this person. And so I went up and started talking to Matt, and Matt was a really cool guy. And then he worked at a comic book store in town. And he said, you should come by the shop sometime. And I was like, okay, yeah, I haven't been in the comic book store in a while. So I did that, and I started hanging out with those guys, and then comic books started to get good again. And I was hanging out at the shop, and they were giving me recommendations. After a while, I just sort of started working there. Like I was just hanging out so much that I just had like, I would do things while I was there just to help. And then I gradually just got a job. And that became a big part of like all those guys, like Matt and Joe and Joel and Craig, everybody, like they were just a huge part of my life, and they still are. We worked together for 6 years, and then we all kind of went our separate ways. Then Legend opened, and they all funneled there, and I came with them. And so, yeah, if it was not for Hellboy and that like really my life would have not gone this way. I'm sure of it, because I would not have met Matt. I wouldn't have known to talk to him. I just would have sat alone on that couch drinking a beer. I maybe would have struck up a conversation with somebody else, and who knows?
What is comic shop etiquette? The do's and the don'ts.
Well, I know that your mileage may vary depending on which shop you go to. There's a terrible stereotype. I mean, it's not a stereotype because it's partially true, but the whole like, this isn't a library, like that sort of thing. Like, don't just pick up a book off the shelf and read it. It's like, I don't mind if you do that. Why would you not be able to? Any bookstore I've ever gone to, I've gone to a shelf, picked up a book, thumbed through it. Maybe I buy the book, maybe I don't, yes, they're collectibles. So I guess don't, like bend the cover around, but certainly if you gently pick it up and thumb and turn it like a person, don't lick your fingers, like that sort of deal. Just, yeah, that's perfectly fine. I don't expect people to buy every single thing they touch. That's a silly thing to expect, right? If you would anyone test drive a car if it meant you had to buy the car? Like, no, that's insane. So yeah, well, I don't know who these people are that spent the 70s, 80s, and 90s just being grumpy about having a pretty awesome job selling dreams to people.
Selling dreams. I mean, like
it's our modern mythology, right? These are our Zeuses and Heras, etc. And they're even in the. For me, etiquette is more of like, if sometimes people get animated when they're talking about like, oh man, I don't know, the final episode of Game of Thrones, and they're real mad about it, right? Because they didn't like it, or The Sopranos, or whatever nerdy thing that they are freaking out about. Be cognizant of your surroundings, for there may be children around, and don't just unleash a litany of F-bombs because you're in a public space. Like a comic book store is still a store. You shouldn't be like swearing up a storm or getting like crazy animated and stomping around. It's like, just be cool, and you're having a fun conversation, you're not trying to win a debate. You're not Khrushchev banging a shoe on a podium or anything. Just hang out and have fun. Don't be crazy about it. Be respectful. Don't, like, it's okay. For me, it's okay if you pick up books off the shelf and everything. Don't mistreat them, but please, by all means, hang out. And then I guess if you don't remember where you got a back issue from, don't just put it back somewhere randomly in the drawer. Hand it to me and I'll put it away for you. Because it's terrible to alphabetize those drawers every like 6 months, and you find like a chunk of like, why are the X-Men in with the Daredevils? Like, what happened here? And then, and then who knows what else is going on. So that's a big thing. But again, it's like, it happens. Things get out of order.
How should people begin reading or begin collecting comics?
Don't think about like future money, right? It's certainly think about present money. If you cannot afford to buy expensive books, don't buy expensive books. Comic books, even like, if you want to buy every book off the shelf, that can run many tens of dollars for like the week. If you're buying like all the Marvel books, you're going to spend $80 like just every week. So I would say don't do that either, unless you have the means to do it. Like a great example, Hulk 271, first appearance of Rocket Raccoon. It seems like a no-brainer now, but that book was $2. It was $2 forever. I literally had dozens of that book, so like reams of them, stacks, and they were $2. I sold many for $2. First Rocket Raccoon, who cares? Then Guardians of the Galaxy came out, so that would have been like 2011, something like that. And that book came out in the early 80s. So from 1982 to 2010, that book was $2, and now it's $200. So Was it a speculator book? And I wouldn't think so, but now I've kind of like, if people want that sort of advice, then yeah, buy characters that are new, that haven't had anything done with them, and then wait. And
Ready for a movie.
Eventually maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. Rather, buy what you like. Certainly you have an idea of what you like to watch on TV, what you like to read. If you're not a fan of superheroes, don't buy the superhero books, right? There's plenty of other things. There's comics that are horror, there's comics that are historical, there's funny comics, there's slice of life, autobiographical, all these things. So figure out what you like. What do you want to spend time with every week or once a month or whatever your budget allows, and then go for that.
When was a time you were excited about a comic book that came into the store?
So I have a customer, his name's David, and he told me once, Dave, if ever the books, like I'm looking for First Hal Jordan Green Lantern, Showcase 22. I'm looking for Justice League #1. These are holy grail type books. Like
Right.
you're not just, I was like, well, I said, Dave, if they ever come into the shop, I promise you will be the first to know. Fast forward a year, 2 years, an amount of time. It's a rainy day, and a woman comes in, and she has a wet sack, and she's like, I was gonna just throw these out, but I just thought I'd come by and see if these comics are worth anything. And I was like, well, rapidly, like if they are, they're gonna be for very much longer. So I took the sack and I put it down. I was like, and I pulled the books out, and the ones on the top actually are actively like wet.
Oh,
I'm just like, ugh. And so I'm pulling them down and doing the whole thing, and I'm pulling the stack, and the books are stacked in like such a way that they flop over each other. And these are not great books, but they're all like from an era, right? They're all like Silver Age, but they're not like, they're like Westerns and like Little Lulus and things that just aren't, like, people don't care for these. And they're also kind of beat up. Then I get to the middle of that stack. So protected by all of its brethren stacked on top of it and away from the wet bottom of the sack, there were 4 books. Showcase 22, which is the first Hal Jordan Green Lantern. Showcase 23, which is the second Hal Jordan Green Lantern. Green Lantern #1, and Justice League #1. And I was holding them, and they were at about like, they weren't wet, they weren't water damaged, they were a little yellowed from age,
sure.
but they were like 5.0, like right middle of the road, like perfectly fine. Nothing, like the covers weren't all scratched up or torn, or somebody hadn't drawn like glasses and a mustache on the Green Lantern or anything. So they presented very well, and I was like, oh my God. Yeah. And so I handed that woman a check for a bunch of money, and she took the check, and I took the books and I held them, and then the door opened and David Butler walked in.
Oh,
I'm sorry, yes, David Butler. Is that the other David? And I went, Dave, and I just sort of like handed him to him, and he was like, what the what? I was like, you're the first to know. Like, I did it. Like, you literally are. I have had these books for 5 seconds.
Finish the sentence. If I were a superhero.
If I were a superhero, I think I would demand that there would be more good in the world. Like, somebody's got to put a stop to certain things. And I mean, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if I were a superhero, I would hope that I had the presence of mind to do the right thing all the time and then do it. So that's what I would do.
that's a good answer.
Hooray. All right. Awesome.
Final comments.
Well, thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to end it here, unless you had any final things to say.
I guess to anyone who's curious about collecting comics, do not be afraid. There's a comic book for everybody. And yeah, you should find your local shop and partake in this super awesome cavalcade of dreams that we have in front of us, because the writing honestly has never been better. We're in a golden age of writing right now.
Thanks to Dave and those at Legends Comics and Coffee for making all our dreams come true. You have been watching a video from the Missouri Scholars Academy 2021 Comics, Culture, and the World video series. And as always, be safe, be smart.